My Nikon 18 to 55mm lens is my oldest lens. When I purchased my first DSLR around about 5 years ago now, this very lens came with it. It's the lens I use the vast majority of the time for my landscape photography, and I'd absolutely never set out on a photography adventure without it, no matter how big or how small that adventure may be. In this week's video, I'd like to share with you 4 reasons to why I think my kit lens is just fantastic. Okay, so welcome back to my wonderful little local woodland here in South Munich, and not really got any expectations this evening for the photography. I'm just wandering around and if anything just seeing if I can find any more subjects, compositions or nice scenes. Now just very briefly guys, before I get into my love for this 18 to 55mm kit lens, I wanted to mention again, I've got literally I think about 10 calendars left now. If you do want to buy one, now's the right time. I'm just not going to bother ordering anymore for a few reasons. You know, I'm here in Germany, I'll have to get them shipped over here. I don't know how the post is going to work. I don't think I'm going to be able to get calendars out by New Year soon, so I don't want to take that risk. So yeah, it's a fantastic, really good quality product if you're thinking of buying it, and on top of that you'll really be supporting what I'm doing here, and I'll be extremely grateful for the support and for your purchase. For anyone that's bought any already, thank you guys so much. You know how much it means to me. So I'll put a link in the description below to them calendars if you fancy buying one. Go and check it out. Anyway, my trusty 18 to 55mm lens. I absolutely love this lens, and I don't know, I think I've realised a lot recently that I'm shooting with it all the time, and I don't know, I guess one day I was thinking, I actually quite like this lens, and I get a lot of questions in my Instagram DMs or here on YouTube about lenses, so I thought this would be a good idea to do this video and talk a little bit more in depth about why I love this lens. Now, the first reason to why I love this lens probably comes as a bit of a surprise, and that's its sharpness. Now, sharpness and kit lens aren't really two terms that generally be side by side, you know. There's a bit of a stigma, I think, about kit lenses, and I think a lot of the times they get a bad rep. They're seen as like a beginner's lens, something that you just use to practice with. The image quality generally isn't really good. Well, I'm here to tell you that the image quality of this said lens, you know, obviously I can't talk for all kit lenses, I don't use them all. This is absolutely fantastic, okay? This is the Nikon 18 to 55mm f3.5 to f5.6 version 1, and it's the VR version. So there's even a newer version of this kit lens out now, which is apparently even better. I think nowadays, modern lenses, the sharpness is fine across the board. You know, depending on what you're doing, unless you're printing out massive posters, it's fine. And this is coming from somebody that, oh God, I nearly broke my beloved lens. This is coming from somebody that's used this lens, you know, over the past 4 or 5 years, for the vast majority of the time. And a good way of putting it is this, like, I just mentioned my calendar. I think 11 out of the 12 photographs in my 2020 calendar were taken using this very lens, and I am incredibly happy with the image quality and the sharpness that I'm getting out of this lens, or else I wouldn't be selling the calendar. On top of that, I'm selling fine art photography prints up to the size of A2. Now A2 is pretty big, and honestly, I wouldn't be selling prints unless I was really happy with the image quality. Now, don't get me wrong, I know I could improve on it. If I had money to spend, I'd probably get better lenses that are going to give me a little bit more on the image quality and the sharpness side of things. But honestly guys, do not write off your kit lens in terms of sharpness. This is a fantastic bit of kit, and I think one thing that I've found, if I could give you guys any advice based around the topic of sharpness, would be learn how to manually focus. It's really easy, especially when we're talking about landscapes, and I think that has helped me get the best out of this kit lens in terms of sharpness. The autofocus is wonderful on it, but I think from my experience I can just get that little bit of extra sharpness when I'm manually focusing, and I guess, you know, I can be sure every time that I'm getting a nice pin sharp photograph. So that's reason number one to why I love my 18 to 55mm kit lens. Okay, so reason number two to why I probably shouldn't chuck it like that, I just dropped it before, I'll end up doing it again. The second reason to why I love my kit lens, and this is probably the main reason, or at least the main reason to why it never leaves my camera body, my Nikon D7200, and that is its versatility. In terms of focal lengths, it's so versatile, it's fantastic. So 18mm all the way up to 55mm on a full frame. If you'd like the equivalent, it's something like 27, 28mm, all the way up to about 80, maybe just over 80. Incredibly versatile, a wonderful broad focal length available to you there. 18mm is at its widest, and it's not ultra wide, you know. You guys know I've got my Takina 11 to 16mm lens as well, if I want to shoot ultra wide, but trust me, 18mm is wide enough, more than wide enough for most situations, and that's one reason why I very rarely use my Takina 11 to 16 lens anymore. So yeah, it's pretty wide at 18mm, even on my crop sensor camera. All the way up to 55mm, and that's, like I say, an equivalent of just over 80mm on a full frame, I think. And you're getting into the realms of sort of telephoto there, short telephoto, which opens up many more doors, gives you so many more options, especially if you're experimenting. And that's a wonderful focal length actually for this type of photography in the woodland. On this particular lens, zoomed in at 55mm, I think I can get an aperture still of f5.6, which is, you know, a fairly wide open aperture, and f5.6 together with being zoomed in at 55mm can really help to isolate your subject in the woodland, for example, and give you that beautiful background blur and that sort of thing, one thing we often crave for as photographers. So yeah, that's really fantastic. Definitely be a good lens for portraiture photography as well for that same reason. So yeah, incredibly versatile. And another thing I think is worth mentioning as well is its macro capabilities, which is something that I never do. I love intimate landscapes, intimate scenes now and again, but I've never really delved into macro. But I think this lens it's got a minimal focal distance of around about 1/4 of a meter. So what's that, about this? That basically means zoomed in at 55mm, you can probably still focus to your subject from about that far away, which is really, really good. And I did a quick comparison online compared to some similar lenses. That's pretty close. Bearing in mind you're already zoomed in at 55mm as well, you can get some really, really nice macro shots as well. So it just shows the versatility of the lens, I think. Especially imagine if you're a beginner and you get this. There's so many different things that you can experiment with, so many different types of landscape photography. So yeah, absolutely fantastic for that. So yeah, versatility, the second reason and probably the most important reason to why I love my kit lens. Okay, so the third reason to why I love my 18 to 55mm lens. Sorry, there's a timer lace there, chucking it about again. This one absolutely has to be mentioned, and that is the size and the weight of this lens. And I'm going to deliberately compare with the Nikon 24 to 70 f2.8 VR, and I'm going to compare with that lens because that's the lens I always want. That's the lens I'm always looking at, the one I always want to upgrade this lens to, just because it's the equivalent of this but full frame, especially in terms of focal lengths. So this lens weighs about 260 grams, which is very, very light, but even lighter still when you compare it to the 24 to 70 f2.8, which weighs about 1100 grams, 1.1 kilos, which is just crazy. It's more than 4 times the weight. That's 4 of these lenses in your bag. Yeah, that's absolutely amazing. And it's quite interesting because only a few months ago I would never have even bothered about weight. It didn't really concern me whatsoever if I was buying gear. I'd hear people talk about it on YouTube, and I'd read people talking about it on forums and on specific lens reviews, and they'd give such a mention to weight, and I'd always think, why is it's really not that much of a big deal, it's in your bag anyway, whatever. And then guys, I did the West Highland way, and I realised that every single gram of weight is important. So from then on, or from now on, whenever I buy gear, weight will be quite an important factor, I think. So that's why I really wanted to mention it in this video as well. Sorry, there's a helicopter flying over, I don't know if you can hear me properly. But yeah, that's a huge difference in weight, and also the size. This is probably about half the length of what the 24 to 70 would be, which obviously just saves so much more room in your bag. And for me, it just means that less weight means more time out wandering and exploring actually with my camera, which at the end of the day, I'm sure we can all agree that's the main thing, that's the most important thing. And obviously that in turn means more scenes to be photographed, more photographs to be taken, which in my opinion is the most important thing. How can it not be? So yeah, if a little bit less weight means that I'm out on location a little bit longer, then to me that's really, really important. So definitely worth mentioning. And that's reason number 3 to why I love my kit lens. Okay, so the 4th and final reason to why I love my kit lens, and a lot like the last reason when we talked about the size and the weight of the lens, this is another thing that just absolutely has to be mentioned. And that is the affordability of the lens. It's just so cheap, it's almost a disposable price. Like if I break this lens, I can just go out and buy another one. So brand new for this lens, you're looking at about 180 quid, £200 max. Whereas used, honestly, like between 40 and 60 pounds, that's so cheap. I don't even worry about breaking this thing, because if it does break, I can go and buy another one for peanuts. So I'm going to compare with the Nikon 24 to 70 f2.8 again, which is a much better lens than this, don't get me wrong. But it's just interesting to compare the prices. That lens brand new, you're looking at like 16, 1700 pounds. It's very expensive. Whereas used, even £1,000 at best, maybe 1100. Very expensive, and yes, you're getting a much better product. The image quality is going to be a little bit better, obviously much better glass, it's going to last a lot longer, but to me that's such a massive difference. It's a crazy amount of difference. It's £1,000 difference, and personally, especially at the minute, I'm quite low budget. I'd rather spend that on travelling and getting to more beautiful places just like this, here in Germany. Experiences, to me, they're priceless, not just for the photography, just for yourself. And I'm quite a low budget traveller. 1,000 quid could get me to some really nice places, and definitely could get me some really, really nice photographs. Personally, I'd much rather spend the money on that. For what you're getting for the money, this is still a lens that's got vibration reduction. Like I've mentioned all the other things in the past, the sharpness is fantastic. You can still use filters with this lens, ND filters, graduated ND filters. You can use a polarizer. At this stage in my photography career, it's just an absolute no-brainer. It's so cheap, and I'm getting some really, really good quality images out of it. So that's it, guys. They're the 4 reasons to why I love my kit lens, and I really hope you've enjoyed this video, and I hope above all it's inspired you to, I don't know, be a bit more grateful for your kit lens. Don't always be longing for better glass. You'll get it eventually if you're passionate and you really want it, but for now, this is a top drawer piece of kit, and don't let it get you down, and make sure you're getting out and using your camera and using your kit lens. So that being said, thank you guys so much for watching as always, and I shall see you guys next week on the next adventure. Out.